Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi, welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 365. Today, we're going to be going into knee anatomy. And if you listen to the last episode, I talked about a recent study that came out that was looking at people with a particular condition, osteoarthritis, and how it affects their functional movement, their overall quality of life, and how slight changes in foot positioning can actually lead to a decrease inside the knee on these connective tissue sort of little pillows called the meniscus. And this is what it sits in between your femur and your tibia, which is the lower leg bone, and prevents excess load or pressure on the meniscus. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about knee anatomy and dive into some examples of poses and how you can share cues that speaks to some of what we're talking about here, and really maybe even potentially helping your students. And of course, we won't know who in our class has osteoarthritis, but helping really everybody, but even those kinds of students with the progression of this condition. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to tell you what inspired me to talk about it. I did a workshop yesterday, and it really was my first workshop in a while where I pulled out the anatomy slides. And I'll remind you of this at the end, but if you want the replay, it's actually a replay I'm going to keep inside my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, because it was so good. I was so pleased with how it turned out that I want to keep it for the students in my signature program. So I will have this replay. I typically don't keep replays for more than a week, but I will keep this one. So if you'd like to watch it, send me a DM on Instagram and I'll send it to you. So we did the workshop. I did the workshop yesterday. It went really well. I pulled out the anatomy slides about the knee, and then the agenda of the workshop after we looked at the anatomy of the knee was also to talk about the study, the results of the study, and then to talk about how am I actually going to apply this to teaching. And I want to really make a point here about the application of knowledge. Because if you've ever taken a training, it could have even been a one-day workshop, and you left feeling like my head is full and I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to use any of this information to help me be a better teacher, you're not alone. This is something that is a phenomena that really rests with the presenter teacher. And sometimes in the excitement or the zest or the interest in providing information, presenters will focus so much on getting down into the weeds that they don't actually, and I've been to lots of workshops like this, and especially when they cover anatomy, pretty quickly you can get into the weeds, and then the participants leave the workshop feeling like, wow, I really gained a lot of knowledge, but I don't know how to use it. So this is one of the things that really distinguishes the way I teach workshops and within my training program, because I'm always almost leading with, how are you going to use this in your teaching? And the pairing of those two things really is quite magical. There's building the knowledge, and then how are you going to apply it? So, again, if you want a review of building the knowledge in that component, you can listen to the prior episode, although I'd really suggest you get your copy of the workshop itself. So, let's take a look at some of the poses where we want to kind of keep we want to keep the knees in mind. The first place that we can start is simply by looking at mountain pose. Simply taking our students into mountain pose and looking at them from the side, from the front, not so much from the back, although you could do that, but definitely from the front and from the side. So the front view and the lateral view. And what we want to be looking for is the alignment of the knees, especially specifically the patella, are the kneecaps straight ahead, and the knees with respect to one another. So there's that sort of familiar postural stance, knock knee positioning. And knock knee positioning often, or pretty much always, comes with fallen arches. So if you travel down and look at their feet, you'll see their arches are dropped. And so this is one of the first things you're going to want to correct. So you're going to cue people to kneecaps straight ahead, lift the inner edges of your feet. Now, looking at the feet in particular on their own is another really good exercise to do. And I know I said we were talking about knee anatomy here, but keep in mind the kinetic chain of hip to knee to ankle really means all of those things impact one another. And so here, I will say we're not talking as much about the hip, but looking at the feet can really be helpful to the knees. And even cueing to the feet. So as you teach just your general yoga class with your signature sequence, just focusing a lot of your action cues on speaking to the feet can be so transformative for your students. I mean, think about, for a lot of people, they don't really walk in bare feet unless they're at the beach or in the shower or maybe at some point at home. But in yoga class, they're not only in bare feet, they're also getting cues to the feet if you're sharing them. And for a lot of people, the problems they have at their knee, at their hip, and even all the way up to their low back, to their upper mid back, upper back, neck, shoulder, because of the fascial lines, just really good cues to the feet can absolutely change how people walk, can help them decrease pain, can help them shift from a postural standpoint to maybe an unhealthy posture to one that's more in alignment, and really to bring greater awareness to what is happening at my feet. Am I even thinking about it as I walk, as I stand? And so that's why that first mountain pose you take people in, and maybe you have a point at the beginning of your sequence where they're in mountain pose, this is the perfect time to do it. I've even experimented with bringing them into mountain pose early on and having them close their eyes and taking them through a standing body scan, starting at the feet and working up. So that's another thing you can experiment with in your classes. And if you do experiment with that, send me a DM and let me know how it goes. So those are two things to look at. So we're talking knee and foot positioning when people are in mountain pose. Now, the one distinction I want to make is mountain pose is feet together traditionally. Anatomical position is feet at hip width, but the rest of it is the same. So what I would prefer is having people in anatomical position because it's a lot steadier than mountain pose where their feet are together. So don't be afraid to take liberties there and just take their feet to hip width distance apart and take them through that body scan. So that's step one, or part one. Now, the one thing that I want to bring up, and if you watch the replay, you'll hear this again, is that no knee positioning on its own is bad. I know sometimes even in the exercise science world, People talk about when you come into a lunge, you shouldn't let your knee go past your heel. And they sort of make a really big deal of your knee is going to get injured if you let it go past the heel. And what I'm here to say is that there's nothing about a particular movement on its own, unless, of course, there's a traumatic, rupture of something, or you're in a car accident or some other kind of trauma. Movements that the body makes on its own, those things are not the problem. The problem is when we add a lot of frequency to a particular movement, that's when we create wear and tear. That's where we create a situation where there's that, if you probably heard the phrase repetitive injury, or a cumulative repetitive injury. And that comes from doing something over and over and over again. So oftentimes this comes up in the context of occupational injuries. People get hurt on the job because part of their job requires they do a particular thing a lot. Now, this, of course, is tied often to people that work in factories or people that build cars or people that work in various jobs that have a manual labor aspect to them. But it can even happen if you're typing a lot, or if you're stocking shelves, or if you're lifting heavy boxes, or whatever you're doing. And certainly there are a lot of jobs, retail jobs, or people that work full-time at home as a mom, and they're doing a lot of lifting and pushing a stroller. Things that we do a lot from a functional movement standpoint can create these repetitive stress injuries. That was the word I was missing, stress. And that idea of repetitive stress speaks to a really important variable, which is frequency. So, any of these posts you see on social media that say, don't let the knee go past the heel, don't put the foot on the side of the leg in tree, don't let the shoulders dip below the elbows in chaturanga. Like, yes, we can look at those things individually and say it's probably not in alignment, but there's not going to be a traumatic injury to the body if we do this sort of thing once. The problem becomes if we do this sort of thing a lot. Now, I will say the foot on the side of the knee in tree, I know that gets a lot of airtime. That's sort of BS in my mind because we only teach tree once in a class. So one time for 5 seconds on each knee, if people put their foot on the inner side of the knee, there's not going to be a problem. They don't even have, their nervous system will stop them from pushing too hard against the knee long before any damage happens. And I don't even know, you would have to push on your knee so hard to create damage that it's really a silly statement to even bring up. But teachers really hold on to things like that they hear, mainly because they're hearing it from someone that they believe knows what they're talking about. But I really have to warn you, a lot of people that are teaching yoga classes don't understand anatomy, and yet they use fancy words, they use anatomy-based cues. But if you ask them, what's the reason for that cue? They would just say, well, that's what I was trained to say. So be your own thought process, ask questions, do your own research. These are the ways that you can start to qualify, is what I'm hearing actually true? And getting back to this idea about frequency, let's say, for instance, in a 60-minute yoga class, you're teaching 5 sun A's, 5 sun B's, and then throughout the class, you have them use that connecting vinyasa from high to low push up to up dog to down dog. You have them do that connecting vinyasa maybe 10 more times. That means in that 1 hour yoga class, there's probably 15 or 20 times they're doing high push up, low push up dog, down dog. So you had better be sure you understand the anatomy behind those movements. You had better be sure you're watching your students. You had better be sure you're giving them corrective cues. I mean, that speaks to this idea of frequency, and that it's so important to be really on top of the anatomy and sharing clear cues for the things you ask your students to do a lot. So I wanted to speak to that. Now, taking a look at some of these poses, we took a look at mountain pose. So let's take a look at a forward fold. So you might not think a typical forward fold has much going on, but it's a great way to get an idea of their foot alignment and their knee alignment. So the next time you're teaching and you have people in a forward fold, take a look first at their feet and give them some good cues to the feet that gets them more evenly balanced between the inner and outer edge of the foot, the front and back of the foot. Now, I know some people use four corners of the feet as a cue, and I know some people use a triad of the foot as a cue. Either I think is fine. I don't think one is better than the other. So that's something you can share as a way to start to wake up your students and bring their focus a little bit more to how am I standing? And you can also look as they're in that forward fold for those arches dropping. And that's a really good thing to correct. So get them more on the outer edges of the feet. When you correct that foot positioning, you're also going to see a correction at the knees. So if they do have that inner edge foot drop, you're going to see knock-kneed. You're most likely not going to see the knees turned out with the feet turned out, although you might. I mean, women that grew up doing ballet as a child, sometimes they naturally stand with their hips externally rotated and their feet turned out. So just look and work to get their feet straight ahead. And then in terms of the hips, get their hips forward enough so that their hips are over their heels, even if their knees are bent in between. So that's forward fold. In Warrior Two, the thing to watch for in terms of the front knee is that as they turn to the side and take their arms out wide to get their torso facing sideways, sometimes the knee slumps inward. So that medial shift of the front knee is oftentimes because as they turn their body, the knee comes along for the ride. So watch their front knee, have them center the knee, and you might even say direct your front knee to your front pinky toe. And that can sometimes create a little more shift, which really looks more centered, not shifting to the pinky toe in an excessive way. So that's the thing to watch for in Warrior Two. The other sort of related thing, although the leg position is different, is triangle. So imagine you have your students in downward dog and you ask them to step the right foot forward, drop the back heel, turn to the side, and take your arms out. Now they're in Warrior Two and you want to take them into triangle. So you can ask them to straighten the front knee, take the arms out wide, and lean over, tip to the side. Place a block behind your front shin and press away from the block, press away from the ground, root into your front foot, and open your arms wide. So that's your basic cueing, something you can experiment with for triangle. But the problem for the front knee is that as the spine shifts to the right, in this case, the right leg is forward, this is lateral flexion of the spine. And now that front leg is taking all the weight of the pose. So cues to the back leg and rooting down into the back leg are really helpful. But that front knee is now sort of at the low point. Obviously the ankle's lower, but the front knee can really take the brunt of this leaning forward. So be sure that front knee isn't locked. That's called hyperextension, too much extension. And maybe even ask them to micro bend their front knee just a little as they root into their foot, keeping that front knee slightly bent. This will be a little bit more of a quad engagement than simply leveraging the joint to create that straight leg. And then watch the position of the front knee and make sure that knee is straight ahead. You might also see the same thing you saw in a forward fold, especially if they're leaning forward with the block in front of their leg. So ask them to put the block behind the front leg, which will also help that front knee center up even more. Another pose I wanted to talk about in regards to hyperextension is tree pose. Now, it's sometimes hard to see hyperextension because people have yoga pants on. But if you have any students in shorts, you can look at their knees in tree. Because in tree, that standing leg is knee extension. But because it's a balance, sometimes people will sort of cheat a little bit and they'll super lock out. They'll really lock out that standing leg as a way to help them balance. But when they lock out the joint, that's when it's actually beyond straight. And so that's the sort of thing that you want to correct again by asking them to just micro bend the front knee a little bit root into the standing leg. You could ask them to squeeze the thigh, ask them to engage the quads. This is where you're going to decide how much of the anatomy do I know, because you want to speak from what you know so your confidence grows versus speaking not from what you know, but stuff you just heard. That is a surefire way to bust your confidence. So when you speak from what you know, your confidence grows. When you understand the why behind the cue, you can share it with conviction to build better connection between you and your students. Now, the last pose I wanted to bring up is half pigeon. Now, this is not a weight bearing posture, so we're not going to run into the same problems we potentially run into with the other examples I shared with you. But half pigeon is a particular challenge for the knee if the student is thinking, I've got to get that front shin in line with the top of the mat. Keep in mind, in half pigeon, that front leg is external rotation of the hip and flexion of the knee, with also a little bit of a pivot of the knee joint that allows the shin to shift inward, which is that shifting, that swinging of the shin in towards the middle of the body. As the foot swings in, the knee goes out and then on the ground. But your hip joint, the hip joint is much more primed because it's a ball and socket to rotate versus the knee, which is a hinge pivot joint. And that means when you take your students into half pigeon, especially if they're holding on to this old cue to line the shin up with the front edge of the mat, you're going to see them out of alignment. You're going to see them trying to shove that shin forward. You're going to see them trying to move from their knee. So what you can try is take them into down dog first, have them lift the upper leg, bend the upper knee and move the knee around, and ask them if they notice the ball and socket rotation happening at the hip joint. And then as you have them bring the right knee forward and place it on the ground over by your right hand, don't worry so much about where your shin is. Just keep moving from that right hip and opening up that right hip as you lower down to the head on a block. So that's a way to shift their focus from what is my shin doing to what is my hip doing? Because the hip as the ball and socket really needs to be the driver of movement in the pose as it relates to movement of that front leg. So that takes you through forward fold, warrior two, half pigeon, tree, and triangle. So again, in the workshop, you will see all of this in much more detail, and you'll have the benefit of getting the preliminary slides that review the anatomy, and then the bit about the study, and I break down the format and the results of the study. So keep in mind, you can send me a DM if you'd like the replay of that. So as we wrap this one up, I want to give you a couple of things to keep in mind. I'm recording this. Did I mention that? I'm recording this on August 21st, 2025, and this will go live on August 25th, 2025. And just to let you know, if you are listening to this in August or early September, I am starting a brand new virtual book club in September, and we'll be going over themes from the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is an amazing, inspiring book that came out about 15 years ago. Elizabeth Gilbert is, of course, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and several other wonderful books. And there are themes in this book all about being a creative and what is it like to be a person who does something that has a high degree of creativity. And if you've never thought of teaching yoga as a creative endeavor, start to think of it now that way, because it absolutely is. Just like an artist paints, and just like a singer sings, and just like a composer writes music, when you're creating your sequences, when you're going into your class and taking people through the sequence, you are using creative language, you're using descriptive language, you're using your words and your presence to convey the theme of the sequence. Maybe you're even sharing literal words that speak to a particular theme. So there's a lot of creativity in teaching yoga. And certainly there's a lot of speaking clearly, of having eyes on you, of showing that you're confident, showing that you're empowered. And it's not even so much showing those things, it's more feeling those things. And all those ingredients together are part of the experience of a yoga teacher. So this book goes into those themes in detail, and I have a lot of really fun exercises that you'll do if you enroll. Now, this is a 4-week book club, and it is free. This first time around, I'm doing it for free, and then future iterations, there will be a charge for it. So if you'd like to get information about the Bare Bones Yoga Virtual Book Club, starting September 9th, 2025, send me a DM. The next thing I wanted to tell you is the next group, which will be the 4th group running through my program, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program, also starts at the beginning of September. This is a program designed in just 4 sessions to teach you the fundamentals of anatomy and how to apply it in your teaching through the cues that you share and the sequences you offer. So if you're looking for a way to quickly build your knowledge and how to apply it, this is the perfect program for you. And because you're finding out about it here on the show, you can get a podcast discount of $50 off, which makes your investment just $347. And for that low price, not only do you get the training, you get a bonus one-on-one session with me, you get all the replays, not just to your 4-session training, but you can watch any other group's replays if you want. And the best part is every subsequent iteration of the training that I do, every month I start a new group, you can come to those sessions as well. If you want to repeat any of the sessions, if you want to just rejoin a group of yoga teachers going through the training, if there's something you had questions on and you want to repeat one of the sessions, you can do it again at no extra cost. So this is an absolutely amazing deal. I'll include the link to the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program in my bio. And if you want to enroll for the September session, send me a DM and I'll show you how you can use a coupon code to get the $50 off. Now, the last thing or the next thing is DM me for the workshop replay. And the very last thing is the link to the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program will be in the show notes. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you found this helpful. I'd love to know what you thought about it, so you can always DM me on Instagram and let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll chat with you on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.